Hello, my dear friends. Imagine the streets of ancient Rome just before sunset. The heat of the day is slowly fading, shadows stretch across stone roads, and the city begins to change its rhythm. Shops open wider, voices grow louder. Smoke rises from small street stalls tucked between tall buildings. This is not the world of emperors and senators. This is the everyday Rome of workers, slaves, travelers, and ordinary citizens looking for something quick to eat. Ancient Rome had its own version of junk food. It was not wrapped in paper or served through windows, but it was fast, cheap, filling, and often unhealthy. Most Romans did not cook large meals at home. Especially in cities, many people lived in cramped apartments called insulae. These buildings often had no kitchens, no ovens, and sometimes no safe way to cook at all. Fire was dangerous. Space was limited. So people ate outside. Street food became a normal part of Roman life. Not a luxury, a necessity. And over time it developed into something very similar to modern junk food culture. The most common Roman fast food came from places called thermopolia. These were small street shops with stone counters and large clay jars built into them. Inside these jars was hot food, kept warm throughout the day. People would stop, lean against the counter, and eat quickly before moving on. There were no chairs. No long conversations. Eating was practical, fast, and informal. One of the most common items sold was bread soaked in wine or water. This was cheap, easy, and filling. Bread was the base of almost every Roman meal, and street vendors used old or hard bread, softening it with liquid. It was not elegant, but it satisfied hunger quickly. This was the Roman equivalent of grabbing something cheap just to get through the day. Another popular food was fried dough. Dough was shaped, dropped into hot oil, and cooked quickly. These pieces were sometimes sweetened with honey, sometimes salted. They were greasy, heavy, and comforting. Romans loved them. They were filling, affordable, and required no utensils. You could eat them with one hand while walking. This made them perfect street food. Meat appeared too, but not in clean or healthy ways. Vendors sold sausages made from leftover cuts of meat, fat, and spices. These sausages were often heavily seasoned to hide poor quality. They were grilled or fried and sold hot. For many Romans, this was the only meat they ate regularly. It was cheap, salty, and satisfying, but far from nutritious. Fish-based junk food was also common. Small fish were fried whole and eaten quickly. Sometimes fish was mashed into pastes and spread on bread. One of the most famous Roman food products, garum, appeared everywhere. Garum was a fermented fish sauce made from fish guts left to rot in salt. It smelled strong, tasted intense, and was added to almost everything. For junk food, it added salt and flavor, making cheap food feel richer. Cheese was another street favorite. Hard cheese could last long without spoiling and was easy to slice and sell. It was often eaten with bread or alone. Cheese provided fat and calories, making it popular among laborers who needed energy. It was simple, dense, and heavy, much like modern fast food snacks. Vegetables existed, but they were not the stars. Cooked beans, lentils, or chickpeas were sold in small portions. These were filling, but often poorly prepared. Overcooked, under-seasoned, or mixed with cheap sauces, they were more about volume than nutrition. Romans ate them because they were affordable, not because they were enjoyable. Sweet junk food existed too. Honey was the main sweetener of the ancient world. Vendors sold pastries soaked in honey, dried fruits coated in syrup, and sweetened nuts. These treats were sticky, heavy, and full of sugar. They were especially popular during festivals and crowded days. Children loved them. Adults used them as quick energy boosts. Drinks completed the junk food experience. Cheap wine was everywhere. It was often watered down, sometimes sour, sometimes mixed with herbs or spices to improve the taste. Drinking wine while eating street food was normal, even early in the day. For many Romans, this was safer than drinking water, which could be contaminated. This kind of eating was not considered shameful. It was normal. Philosophers might complain about excess, and elites might pretend to eat carefully at home. But even wealthy Romans ate street food. It was convenient. It was everywhere. It was part of city life. Roman junk food was greasy, salty, heavy, and repetitive. It filled stomachs but often left bodies weak over time. Poor nutrition contributed to health problems, fatigue, and disease. But for people who worked long hours with little control over their lives, fast food offered comfort and speed. Eating this way shaped Roman daily life. People ate standing up. They ate alone or with strangers. Meals were quick, functional, and forgettable. Food was fuel, not ceremony. This pattern feels surprisingly modern. And as the night settles over Rome and the street stalls glow softly under oil lamps, people continue to eat the same foods their neighbors ate yesterday and will eat tomorrow. Bread soaked in wine, fried dough, cheap sausage, a splash of garum, simple, fast, and far from healthy. This is where Roman junk food truly lived. Not in banquets, not in marble halls, but in the narrow streets, among the noise, the smoke, and the constant movement of a city that never truly rested. As night fully settles over the city, the streets of Rome do not fall quiet. Instead, they soften into a slower, heavier rhythm. Oil lamps flicker. Footsteps echo between stone walls. And the smell of food becomes stronger, not weaker. This is the hour when Roman junk food truly takes over daily life because, for many people, this is the only meal that really matters. Most Romans worked long, exhausting days. Laborers, dock workers, porters, messengers, builders, slaves, and shop assistants rarely had time or energy to cook. When the day ended, hunger was immediate and urgent. Street food answered that hunger quickly. There was no waiting, no preparation, no ceremony. You ate because your body demanded it, not because you wanted pleasure. Thermopolia became gathering points at this hour. These were not restaurants. They were functional spaces. People leaned against counters, standing shoulder to shoulder with strangers. No one asked questions about ingredients. No one expected cleanliness. Food was trusted because it was hot and familiar, not because it was safe or fresh. One of the most common junk meals at night was leftover stew reheated again and again throughout the day. These stews were thick, murky mixtures of beans, grains, scraps of meat, and whatever vegetables had not spoiled yet. Flavor came mostly from salt and garum. The longer a stew sat, the stronger it smelled, but Romans accepted this as normal. Strong smell meant strong taste, and strong taste meant satisfaction. Fried foods dominated night eating. Oil masked age. Frying made old ingredients edible again. Vendors dropped dough, vegetables, or scraps of meat into hot oil, producing food that was greasy, heavy, and comforting. This food filled the stomach quickly and dulled hunger fast. Romans knew it was not healthy, but health was not the priority. Endurance was. Cheap sausages were especially popular after sunset. These sausages were made from parts of animals that could not be sold elsewhere. Fat, organs, connective tissue, mixed with spices. Spices were not added for elegance. They were added to hide decay. The result was salty, intense, and addictive. Once eaten hot, it was difficult to tell how fresh it truly was. Fish-based junk food also appeared more often at night. Small fish were fried whole and eaten quickly, bones and all. Fish paste mixed with garum was spread onto bread and sold cheaply. This combination was extremely salty and rich, creating thirst and encouraging people to buy more watered wine. The cycle fed itself. Eat salty food, drink wine, eat again. Wine itself was part of junk food culture. It was not treated as alcohol the way it is today. It was food. Cheap wine provided calories, warmth, and mild intoxication. Vendors sold it in cups alongside food. It was often mixed with herbs, honey, or vinegar to improve taste. For many Romans, this was safer than drinking water. Sweet junk food became more visible in crowded areas. Honey-soaked pastries, nuts coated in syrup, and dried fruits were sold near theaters, baths, and festivals. These sweets were sticky, heavy, and full of sugar. They provided quick energy and comfort. Children begged for them. Adults used them to fight exhaustion. There was little concern about balance or nutrition. Meals were built around hunger, not health. Protein, fat, and salt dominated. Vegetables were secondary. Fresh fruit was rare and expensive in cities. What mattered was fullness. A full stomach meant you could sleep. Junk food also blurred social boundaries. Rich and poor ate from the same stalls. Slaves and free citizens stood side by side. In the street, status mattered less. Hunger equalized people. This shared experience made street food deeply woven into Roman identity. Eating was fast and forgettable. People did not linger. There were no plates to wash, no rooms to clean. You ate, wiped your hands, and moved on. Food was fuel for survival in a crowded, exhausting city. Over time, this style of eating shaped Roman bodies. Many people suffered from digestive problems, tooth decay, and fatigue. Ancient writers complained about bloating, weakness, and illness. Philosophers warned against excess. Doctors advised moderation. But advice meant little when daily life offered few alternatives. Junk food thrived because Rome itself demanded it. Dense population, dangerous housing, long work hours, and limited resources made home cooking impractical. Street food was the solution, even if it came with consequences. As lamps dim and vendors begin to pack away their pots, the streets slowly empty. Stomachs are full, bodies are tired, and tomorrow will bring the same routine, the same bread, the same oil, the same sausage, the same garum. This repetition is the heart of Roman junk food. Not luxury, not celebration, just daily survival, eaten standing up, in the shadows of stone walls, by people who need energy more than elegance. As days turned into weeks and weeks into years, Roman junk food stopped being something people noticed at all. It became background noise to city life, as ordinary as dust on sandals or the smell of smoke in the air. For most Romans, especially those living in crowded insulae, street food was not a choice made once in a while. It was the foundation of daily eating, repeated so often that it shaped bodies, habits, and even expectations of what food was meant to do. Morning eating was simple and rushed. Many Romans did not eat a proper breakfast. Instead, they grabbed whatever was available on the way to work. a piece of bread dipped in watered wine, a small chunk of cheese, leftover fried dough from the night before. Vendors were already awake, reheating yesterday's food, stirring pots that never truly cooled. Freshness mattered less than availability. Hunger did not wait for better options. These early meals were dry, salty, and filling. They were meant to quiet hunger until evening. Junk food in Rome was often eaten in layers across the day, not as full meals, but as repeated small portions. This constant grazing kept energy moving, but left little room for proper nutrition. The body adapted but slowly weakened over time. At midday, the streets grew busier again. Workers paused briefly, not to rest, but to eat standing up before returning to labor. Thermopolia did their best business at this hour. Stews were reheated again, thickened with grain or breadcrumbs to stretch portions. The taste changed as the day went on. By midday, food was heavier, saltier, and more intense. Romans accepted this without complaint. Strong flavor meant strength. Garum appeared everywhere at this hour. It was poured over bread, mixed into stews, added to vegetables, and used to revive bland or old food. Its smell filled the air. Outsiders might find it unbearable, but Romans associated it with satisfaction. Garum was protein, salt, and familiarity all at once. It made junk food feel complete. Fried food continued to dominate. Oil was reused repeatedly, darkening and thickening over time. This oil coated everything. Dough, vegetables, fish, and scraps of meat all passed through the same pot. Romans did not fear this. They expected it. Grease meant calories. Calories meant strength to work another day. Sausages remained one of the most popular items. They were cheap, portable, and filling. Vendors sold them hot, often wrapped in bread. People ate them quickly, sometimes without stopping. The spices masked age and quality, but no one asked questions. Sausages were trusted because they were familiar, not because they were safe. Cheese and bread continued to anchor junk meals. Cheese was dense and salty, ideal for laborers. Bread filled space in the stomach. Together they formed the simplest Roman fast food combination. No cooking required, no waiting. Just eat and move. Sweet foods appeared more often in public spaces. Near baths, theaters, and games, vendors sold honey-soaked treats. These sweets were sticky, heavy, and indulgent. They provided quick energy and comfort, especially after exhausting labor. Romans did not think of sugar as dangerous. It was rare enough to feel like a gift. Drinks remained an essential part of junk food culture. Cheap wine was everywhere. It was mixed with water, herbs, or honey. Drinking wine while eating was normal, even for young people. This constant low-level drinking dulled hunger, eased pain, and made exhaustion easier to tolerate. Over time, this way of eating shaped Roman health. Many people suffered from bloating, stomach pain, and weakness. Teeth wore down quickly from coarse bread and constant chewing. Doctors wrote about digestive problems and fatigue. They advised moderation, fresh food, and home cooking. But these ideas rarely matched reality. Most Romans could not afford fresh food daily. Markets sold fresh produce early in the morning, but prices rose quickly. By midday, only scraps remained. Junk food filled the gap between what people needed and what they could afford. Even children grew up on street food. They learned early that eating meant standing, grabbing, chewing, and moving on. Meals were not family events. They were interruptions in work or play. This shaped social habits as much as physical ones. Junk food also blurred time. Because food was always available on the street, there was no clear separation between meals. People ate when hungry, not when clocks told them to. This constant access mirrored modern fast food culture in surprising ways. Despite its problems, Roman junk food provided stability. It was predictable. You knew what you would get. You knew where to find it. In a crowded, dangerous city, this reliability mattered. As evening approached again, the cycle repeated. Vendors reheated food, oil smoked, garum flowed, bread softened in wine, Romans lined up, leaned on counters, and ate without thinking. This repetition, day after day, is what truly defines Roman junk food. Not indulgence, not novelty, but constant availability, heavy flavor, and quick satisfaction in a world that demanded endurance more than health. As this rhythm continued day after day, Roman junk food began to shape not only bodies but behavior. Eating became something done almost without awareness, like breathing in a smoky street or stepping around puddles. People no longer asked whether food was good or bad. The only question was whether it was available, hot and filling enough to keep them moving. Street vendors learned exactly how Romans ate. Portions were designed to satisfy hunger quickly, not to nourish long-term health. Food was dense, salty, and heavy. Salt mattered more than spice. Salt preserved food, increased thirst, and made simple ingredients addictive. Vendors understood that a salty meal meant another cup of wine sold, another coin earned. This cycle kept junk food profitable and constant. The reuse of food was normal. Stews were not thrown away at night. They were reheated the next day, then again the next. Bread that went stale was softened in liquid. Meat that could not be sold fresh was chopped, spiced, and turned into sausage. Oil used for frying grew darker each day, absorbing flavors from everything cooked in it. Romans expected this taste. It became familiar, almost comforting. Garum played a central role in this system. Its intense flavor allowed vendors to disguise age, quality, and repetition. The same stew could taste different simply by adding more garum. This made junk food flexible and forgiving. Garum also provided protein and salt, which made people feel satisfied even when the food itself was poor. Junk food also adapted to different parts of the city. Near ports and markets, fish-based foods dominated. Fried fish, fish paste, and garum-heavy dishes were common. Near construction sites and workshops, bread, cheese, and sausage ruled. Near entertainment districts, sweets and wine became more visible. Junk food followed crowds, not tradition. Social habits adjusted around this way of eating. People did not gather around tables, they stood, leaned, or squatted near walls. Eating was quick and temporary. This reduced the sense of shared meals and family dining, especially among the poor. Food became individual even when eaten among others. Romans rarely washed their hands properly before eating street food. Water was precious and cleanliness was not prioritized the way it is today. Hands wiped on clothing were enough. This contributed to illness, but it was accepted as part of life. Junk food was risky, but hunger was worse. Doctors and writers noticed the effects. Ancient medical texts describe stomach pain, bloating, fatigue, and weakness among city dwellers. Some blamed garum. Others blamed overeating or fried foods. Philosophers criticized the loss of moderation, but their advice rarely reached the streets. Survival mattered more than ideals. Even the wealthy were not immune. Although they had kitchens and servants, they still ate junk food while traveling, attending games, or moving through the city. A senator might eat a fine meal at home and then grab fried dough on the street later. Junk food crossed class lines easily. Children grew up watching adults eat this way. They learned early that food came from counters, not kitchens. They associated hunger with noise, smoke, and crowds. This shaped how future generations understood eating. Junk food became cultural, not just practical. The physical environment reinforced this habit. Insulae were cramped and unsafe. Cooking fires caused deadly blazes. Many landlords banned cooking entirely. Street food was safer than home cooking, even if it was unhealthy. This made junk food not just convenient, but necessary. Over time, the idea of a proper meal faded for many Romans. Eating became about timing and availability, not balance. Heavy foods in the evening, small bites during the day, wine throughout. This pattern mirrors modern fast food culture in ways that feel almost uncomfortable. Yet for all its flaws, Roman junk food kept the city alive. It fed millions every day. It allowed labor to continue. It supported a dense urban population that could not have survived on home cooking alone. Junk food was part of Rome's infrastructure, as essential as roads or aqueducts. As night falls again, the same stalls glow under oil lamps, the same pots bubble. The same smells fill the air. People line up without thinking, coins in hand, hunger already decided. They eat, wipe their hands, and disappear into the streets. This endless repetition is the true nature of Roman junk food. Not indulgence, not pleasure, but habit. A system built around speed, salt, and survival in a city that never slowed down. As this way of eating continued year after year, Roman junk food quietly reshaped the body in ways people rarely connected to food itself. Hunger was satisfied, but strength faded slowly. People grew used to feeling heavy, bloated, and tired, assuming this was simply what adulthood felt like. Junk food did not kill quickly. It wore the body down gently, one greasy meal at a time. Bread remained the center of everything, but it was rarely fresh for the poor. Fresh bread was expensive and sold early in the day. By afternoon, what remained was dry, cracked, and hard. Street vendors softened it in wine, water, or thin broth, turning it into something chewable again. This bread absorbed liquid quickly, swelling in the stomach and creating the feeling of fullness. Romans valued this feeling more than taste or nutrition. Oil played a powerful role in Roman junk food. Olive oil was reused endlessly. Each frying darkened it further, thickening it with residue from previous foods. This oil coated everything, clinging to dough, fish, vegetables, and meat scraps. The heavy, greasy texture slowed digestion and made people feel sluggish, but it also delivered calories cheaply. For laborers burning energy all day, this grease was both blessing and curse. Sausages continued to dominate street food culture. These were not clean cuts of meat. They were survival foods made from organs, fat, blood, and scraps. Spices covered imperfections. Salt preserved them. When grilled or fried, they smelled irresistible. Romans associated this smell with nourishment and relief. Few questioned what went into them. Asking questions meant risking hunger. Garum remained everywhere, seeping into every corner of junk food culture. It was poured over bread, mixed into stews, and used as dipping sauce. Its extreme saltiness stimulated appetite even when the body was already full. This encouraged overeating. not because of pleasure, but because the mouth demanded more. Romans did not understand this biologically, but they felt it daily. Vegetables existed mostly as fillers. Cabbage, onions, beans, and lentils were cooked until soft, then soaked in garum or oil. Their nutritional value was reduced by overcooking, but they added volume to meals. Volume mattered. A full stomach meant better sleep in crowded rooms where hunger could not be ignored. Sweet junk food slowly became more common. Honey was expensive, but small amounts went far. Vendors coated cheap pastries, nuts, and dried fruits in honey to make them feel luxurious. These sweets were sticky, heavy, and addictive. They provided fast energy and brief comfort, especially for children and exhausted adults. Drinks continued to blur the line between nourishment and habit. Wine was consumed daily, often mixed with water, sometimes mixed with vinegar or herbs. It dulled pain, softened hunger, and made repetitive food easier to accept. Many Romans drank wine the way modern people drink soft drinks. It was normal, constant, and rarely questioned. Health problems accumulated slowly. Teeth wore down from constant chewing of coarse bread. Gums became inflamed. Stomach pain became normal. Ancient doctors wrote about digestive disorders, fatigue, and weakness, especially among urban populations. They blamed poor digestion, imbalance, or excess. Few blamed street food directly because street food was unavoidable. The body adapted in unhealthy ways. People became accustomed to heavy food late at night, poor sleep, and constant low-level intoxication. Energy spiked and crashed. Hunger returned quickly. This cycle trapped people in dependency on the same foods that weakened them. Despite this, junk food offered emotional comfort. In a city filled with danger, noise, and exhaustion, familiar flavors created stability. The taste of fried dough, salty sausage, or garum-soaked bread reminded people that life continued, even if it was hard. Children grew into adults on this diet. Their bodies formed around it. Their expectations of food were shaped by speed and availability, not balance. Family meals became rare for the urban poor. Eating became solitary, rushed, and forgettable. Junk food also became tied to entertainment. Near arenas, theaters, and public games, vendors sold the saltiest, greasiest food. Excitement increased appetite. Wine flowed freely. Eating became part of spectacle, not sustenance. The Roman state tolerated this system because it worked. The city stayed fed. Workers returned to labor. Hunger riots were avoided. Junk food kept the population functional enough to continue daily life. As years passed, this diet became tradition. New generations inherited it without question. Junk food was no longer seen as a compromise. It was simply how Romans ate in cities. And so the streets continued to fill with smoke, oil, and voices. Pots bubbled endlessly. Bread softened. Sausages sizzled. Garum flowed. Romans ate quickly, wiped their hands, and moved on, unaware that this daily habit was shaping their bodies and lives just as deeply as any law or battle. As this pattern settled deeper into Roman life, junk food stopped being something temporary or situational. It became structural. Entire neighborhoods depended on it. Entire work schedules were built around it. The city itself adjusted to the assumption that people would eat outside, quickly and often poorly. Rome did not just allow junk food, it relied on it. Thermopolia multiplied across the city. Archaeological remains show them packed tightly into busy streets. especially near crossroads, baths, markets, and entertainment districts. Their counters were worn smooth by elbows and hands. The large clay jars set into stone held food kept warm for hours, sometimes days. The contents were rarely fresh. Freshness was not the goal. Availability was. These jars contained stews thickened with grain, beans, and scraps of meat. Over time, flavors layered on top of each other. Yesterday's stew became today's base. New ingredients were added not to replace, but to stretch what already existed. Romans accepted this practice completely. A stew that had been cooking for days was not considered unsafe. It was considered rich. Oil smoke hung permanently in the air around these stalls. Frying was constant. Dough, vegetables, fish, and meat scraps went into the same oil. The oil darkened, thickened, and absorbed flavor. This created a taste Romans recognized instantly. Greasy, heavy, familiar. That taste became associated with fullness and relief. Junk food was designed to overpower the senses. Salt dominated everything. Garum intensified flavor. Frying created crunch and aroma. These elements distracted from quality. Even spoiled or tough ingredients could be eaten once they were salted, fried, and sauced. Romans did not describe this as deception. They described it as skill. Meat quality in junk food continued to decline as cities grew. Prime cuts went to the wealthy. Street vendors worked with leftovers. Organs, blood, fat, connective tissue. Everything usable went into sausages. Spices and salt masked texture and smell. Once cooked, the result was satisfying enough. Hunger did the rest. Fish-based junk food followed the same logic. Small fish were cheap and plentiful. Fried whole, they required no cleaning or preparation. Bones were swallowed without thought. Fish paste mixed with garum turned scraps into something spreadable and intensely flavored. This food was salty, oily, and thirst-inducing, perfectly paired with cheap wine. Vegetables continued to exist only as support. Cabbage, onions, lentils, and beans were boiled until soft, then drowned in oil or sauce. Their nutritional value was reduced, but they added bulk. Bulk mattered. A heavy stomach meant sleep came easier in noisy, crowded housing. Sweet junk food became more common as trade expanded. Honey remained expensive, but even small amounts transformed cheap food into something desirable. Vendors learned that sweetness sold quickly. Sticky pastries, honeyed nuts, and dried fruits coated in syrup became crowd favorites, especially near games and festivals. Wine completed every junk meal. Cheap, sour, and heavily watered, it was consumed without thought. Wine dulled pain, softened hunger, and made repetitive food tolerable. It also increased dependency on salty foods, creating a loop that benefited vendors. Eat salty food, drink wine, eat again. This constant cycle affected Roman health quietly but deeply. People grew accustomed to digestive discomfort. Bloating, gas, and stomach pain were normalized. Fatigue became expected. Ancient medical writers described urban populations as weaker than rural ones, blaming lifestyle rather than food systems. Teeth suffered badly. Coarse bread wore enamel down. Sugar from honey and dried fruits damaged teeth further. Dental pain was common and untreated. People adapted by chewing on one side, softening food, or simply enduring pain. Despite this, junk food created emotional stability. Familiar smells and tastes brought comfort in an unpredictable city. People trusted street food because it was always there. In a world without refrigeration or modern safety, familiarity felt like safety. Children absorbed this culture early. They learned that eating meant standing in crowds, grabbing food quickly, and moving on. Meals were not events. They were interruptions. This shaped how Romans thought about food for generations. Junk food also shaped time. Because food was always available, meals lost clear boundaries. People ate whenever hunger struck. This constant grazing mirrored the pace of Roman city life, where work and rest blurred together. The state tolerated and indirectly supported this system. A fed population was a stable population. Junk food reduced unrest. It kept workers functional. It filled the gap between poverty and survival. As night deepened again, vendors stirred pots one more time. Oil smoked. Garum splashed. Bread softened. Romans lined up, ate quickly, and disappeared into alleys and stairwells. Tomorrow would be the same. This endless repetition is what truly defines Roman junk food. Not indulgence, not novelty, but a system built to keep a massive city alive at the cost of long-term health. One greasy, salty meal at a time. As this system continued to function day after day, Roman junk food began to influence how people understood hunger itself. Hunger was no longer a signal to prepare food or gather family. It became a trigger to move toward the street, toward smoke, toward noise. The body learned that relief came not from rest, but from standing in line, exchanging a coin and eating quickly while the city pressed in from all sides. Roman workers adjusted their bodies to this rhythm. Heavy, greasy food eaten quickly became normal. The stomach stretched and adapted. People expected to feel full, not nourished. A meal that did not leave the body heavy felt incomplete. Junk food trained expectations downward, teaching people that food's purpose was to stop hunger, not to restore health. This way of eating also shaped how Romans judged food quality. Freshness mattered less than heat. A hot meal felt safer, even if it had been reheated multiple times. Cold food was suspicious. Vendors understood this instinctively. Food stayed on the fire all day, not for flavor, but for trust. Heat became a substitute for hygiene. The smell of food became more important than appearance. Romans followed their noses through the city. The sharp salt of garum, the heavy scent of frying oil, the sweetness of honeyed dough, all signaled availability. These smells cut through the stench of waste, animals, and bodies that filled the city. Junk food smelled alive in a city that often smelled like decay. Eating quickly also reduced social connection around meals. There was no time for conversation or reflection. People ate standing, leaning, or walking. Meals were solitary even when surrounded by others. This isolation shaped Roman urban life quietly, making eating a private act performed in public space. Junk food also influenced how Romans experienced pleasure. Pleasure became immediate and short-lived. Salty, greasy, sweet flavors hit quickly and faded just as fast. This encouraged repeated eating, not because hunger returned, but because the mouth wanted the sensation again. Romans did not understand this chemically, but they felt it daily. Street vendors adjusted portions carefully. Too much food slowed customers down. Too little caused complaints. The goal was just enough to quiet hunger without stopping movement. Junk food supported productivity. A worker who ate quickly returned to labor sooner. The city depended on this efficiency. Food safety was rarely questioned openly. Illness was common and accepted. When people became sick, they blamed fate, the gods, or their own weakness. Rarely did they blame food. Junk food was too essential to criticize deeply. Criticism would require alternatives most people did not have. Writers and philosophers complained anyway. They described urban diets as softening the body and weakening character. They praised rural simplicity and home cooking. But these voices belonged to people with kitchens, land, and servants. For most Romans, such advice was irrelevant. Junk food was not a moral failing, it was survival. Even celebrations relied on junk food. During festivals and public games, vendors multiplied. The food became heavier, saltier, sweeter. Wine flowed freely. Eating became part of the spectacle. Romans associated joy with indulgence, even if that indulgence caused discomfort later. The moment mattered more than the body's long-term state. Children learned early to associate happiness with street food. A honey-soaked pastry near the arena. Fried dough after the baths. These memories stuck. Junk food became emotional as well as physical nourishment. It comforted, distracted, and rewarded in small ways. Over time, this diet widened the gap between city and countryside. Rural Romans ate simpler but fresher food. Urban Romans ate heavier but poorer quality food. Ancient doctors noticed that city dwellers tired more easily and fell ill more often. Still, cities continued to grow, and junk food continued to feed them. The physical layout of Rome reinforced this pattern. Narrow streets, dense housing, and constant crowds made home cooking impractical. Street food was always closer than a kitchen. This convenience shaped behavior more powerfully than any law. As night deepened, the same cycle repeated. People returned from baths, games, or work. Hunger hit suddenly. Vendors were ready. Pots bubbled, oil smoked, garum splashed, bread softened, coins exchanged hands, food disappeared into mouths. Relief followed briefly. This endless repetition blurred days together. Junk food made time feel circular rather than linear. Yesterday's meal tasted like today's and tomorrow's. This sameness offered stability in a chaotic world, even as it slowly weakened bodies. Roman junk food in the end was not about pleasure or excess. It was about endurance in a crowded, demanding city. It kept people moving, working, and surviving. It traded long-term health for short-term stability, and Rome accepted that trade without hesitation. And so the streets continued to feed millions, one greasy portion at a time, shaping lives quietly, persistently, and completely, without ever asking whether there might be a better way. As this way of eating continued across generations, Roman junk food began to shape memory itself. People remembered their lives through tastes and smells rather than meals or moments. The scent of hot oil drifting through an alley, the sharp bite of garum on bread, the sweetness of honey sticking to fingers. These sensations became anchors in daily life, marking time more clearly than calendars or seasons. For many Romans, hunger arrived suddenly and intensely. Long hours of labor drained the body fast. Junk food was designed to answer that hunger immediately. Heavy fats slowed digestion. Salt pulled water into the stomach. Bread expanded after soaking. The body felt full quickly, even if nutrition was poor. This physical response trained people to trust junk food as reliable relief. The predictability of street food mattered deeply. In a city where fires, floods, disease, and violence were common, knowing exactly what food would taste like brought comfort. Even if it was bad, it was familiar. Familiarity felt safe. Vendors rarely changed recipes. Consistency kept customers returning. This predictability also shaped social behavior. Romans chose food stalls the way people today choose favorite fast food places. Loyalty formed. A certain vendor's sausage, a certain stew, a certain bread soaked just right. These preferences became part of identity, especially in neighborhoods where people had little else to control. Junk food stalls also became informal social markers. People gathered near them not to eat together but to exist together. News traveled there. Gossip spread. Arguments started. Deals were made. Food created spaces where people paused just long enough for the city to feel connected. The physical toll continued quietly. Diets heavy in salt increased thirst, leading to more wine consumption. Wine dulled pain but dehydrated the body further. This cycle increased fatigue. People woke tired, worked tired, and ate tired. Junk food became both the cause and the solution to exhaustion. Ancient medical writers described this condition without fully understanding it. They spoke of imbalance, heaviness, and internal heat. Treatments focused on purging, rest, or changing habits, but these solutions rarely matched urban reality. A laborer could not rest. A slave could not choose food. Advice remained theoretical. Junk food also influenced body image. Thinness was associated with weakness. A fuller body suggested access to food and endurance. Junk food helped maintain this appearance, even if health suffered underneath. Romans judged health visually more than internally. Food preparation techniques became optimized for speed and volume. Frying replaced boiling. Reheating replaced fresh cooking. Saucing replaced seasoning. These shortcuts allowed vendors to feed many people quickly. Quality was sacrificed for efficiency, but efficiency kept the city alive. The role of women in this system was often invisible. Many vendors were men, but preparation often happened elsewhere, sometimes by women working in hidden kitchens or homes. Their labor supported the junk food economy quietly, rarely acknowledged. Children learned this system early. They grew accustomed to salty flavors and greasy textures. Their tastes developed around junk food, making fresh food seem bland later. This reinforced the cycle across generations. The more Rome grew, the more junk food adapted. New ingredients arrived through trade, but they were absorbed into the same system. New spices enhanced sausages. New grains thickened stews. Nothing changed the structure. Junk food remained fast, heavy, and repetitive. Festivals intensified everything. More vendors, louder streets, saltier food, sweeter treats. Wine flowed freely. Junk food became celebration fuel, even if it caused discomfort later. Romans accepted this trade eagerly. Pleasure now mattered more than consequences later. By nightfall, the city slowed but did not stop. Vendors stayed open late for those returning from baths or entertainment. Eating late became normal. Heavy food before sleep disrupted rest, but people adapted. Poor sleep became routine. This adaptation hid the damage. When everyone feels tired, tiredness feels normal. When everyone eats heavy food, heaviness feels natural. Junk food reshaped expectations so thoroughly that alternatives felt unnecessary or impossible. Roman junk food did not exist in opposition to proper meals. For many, it replaced them entirely. Kitchens became rare. Cooking became dangerous. Street food filled the gap completely. As another day faded into night, the city repeated itself. Smoke rose, oil bubbled, bread softened, sausages sizzled. Coins exchanged hands. Hunger disappeared briefly, only to return again tomorrow. This constant cycle is what sustained Rome. Not balance, not health, but repetition. A system designed to keep bodies moving and the city functioning, even as it slowly consumed the strength of those who depended on it most. As this food system kept repeating itself, it began to quietly influence how Romans understood strength, weakness, and survival. Strength was no longer connected to freshness or care. It was connected to tolerance. A strong body was one that could endure heavy food, poor sleep, long hours, and constant strain without collapsing. Junk food trained the body for endurance, not wellness. People learned to eat in ways that minimized discomfort rather than maximized health. They learned which stalls caused stomach pain and which ones did not. They learned which sausages were too greasy, which stews were too old, which oils sat too long on the fire. This knowledge was passed casually through habit and observation, not instruction. Junk food became a practical skill. The constant salt in Roman junk food changed thirst patterns. People drank frequently, not because they were dehydrated, but because salt demanded it. Wine filled this role easily. Cheap wine was available everywhere, often more reliable than water. Drinking wine with meals became automatic. This further blurred the line between eating and drinking. Both were fuel. Because junk food was always available, hunger lost its warning power. People no longer waited to eat until truly hungry. They ate when food appeared, when smells tempted them, when routines allowed. This constant intake created a steady, dull fullness that replaced natural hunger cycles. The body adapted, but not without cost. Junk food also shaped the pace of life. Because meals were quick, rest was short. Because rest was short, fatigue accumulated. Because fatigue accumulated, heavier food felt necessary. This loop tightened over time. Rome moved fast, and junk food was designed to match that speed. The economic side of junk food became deeply rooted. Vendors relied on volume, not quality. Selling many small portions was safer than selling fewer large ones. This encouraged portion sizes that satisfied briefly, but encouraged return. Customers came back again and again, sometimes to the same stall multiple times a day. Food waste was minimized through junk food practices. Nothing was thrown away easily. Old bread was softened. Old stew was reheated. Meat scraps were ground and spiced. Oil was reused until it could no longer cling to food. From one angle, this was efficient. From another, it was dangerous, but efficiency mattered more. Seasonal changes affected junk food only slightly. In winter, stews became thicker. In summer, frying increased because it required less water. Ingredients changed, but structure remained the same. Junk food adjusted without transforming. The smell of Roman junk food became part of the city's identity. Travelers wrote about it. Outsiders remembered it. The combination of smoke, oil, garum, and bread defined urban Rome more than monuments or forums. Food announced the city before walls did. This smell also masked unpleasant realities. Waste, sewage, animals, and overcrowding produced constant stench. Junk food smells cut through it. They signaled life, activity, and nourishment. They made the city feel alive rather than decaying. Over time, this diet shaped disease patterns. Parasites, stomach infections, and nutritional deficiencies were common. People accepted this as fate. Medical explanations focused on imbalance or temperament rather than food systems. Junk food escaped blame because it was essential. Despite its flaws, junk food created routine in an unstable world. It was predictable in a city full of uncertainty. Fires could destroy homes. Plagues could sweep through neighborhoods. But food stalls reopened. Pots were set back on fires. The system resumed. This reliability built emotional dependence. People trusted junk food not because it was good, but because it was always there. When everything else failed, you could still eat. Children grew into this reality without comparison. For them, food had always come from the street. Kitchens were distant ideas. Eating was something done among crowds, not families. This shaped social bonds subtly but permanently. The longer this system lasted, the harder it became to imagine alternatives. Home cooking felt dangerous. Fresh food felt rare. Junk food felt normal. The city organized itself around this assumption. As night deepened once more, the same stalls glowed. The same jars were stirred, the same oil smoked. People arrived with the same hunger, ate the same food, and left with the same heaviness. This continuity was Rome's strength and weakness at the same time. Junk food allowed the city to function, but it quietly drained the vitality of the people who depended on it most. And still the cycle continued, uninterrupted, unquestioned, and deeply woven into the fabric of daily life, as Rome moved forward on full stomachs and tired bodies, one quick meal at a time. By this point in Roman history, junk food was no longer just a response to hunger. It had become a quiet force shaping how people aged, how they worked, and how they understood their own limits. Romans did not wake up thinking about food quality or long-term health. They woke up thinking about whether their bodies would carry them through another day. Junk food promised that possibility, even if it slowly took something away each time. The body adapted in subtle ways. People learned to function while feeling heavy, slightly unwell, or tired. This became the baseline. Feeling truly energetic was rare enough that it felt unusual. Junk food created a steady state of endurance rather than strength. Romans mistook this endurance for resilience, not realizing how much potential was being lost. Eating late became especially common. After long days of labor, people arrived at food stalls exhausted and ravenous. Heavy, greasy food eaten at night dulled hunger quickly, but disrupted sleep. Yet poor sleep became normal. Crowded housing, noise, and heat already made rest difficult. Junk food simply layered another burden onto an already strained body. The repetition of flavors numbed the senses. Salt dominated everything. Garum overwhelmed subtlety. Oil coated the tongue. Over time, Romans lost sensitivity to lighter tastes. Fresh vegetables or simple grains tasted bland by comparison. This reinforced dependence on heavily flavored food. Junk food reshaped taste itself. Food stalls began to function almost like extensions of the body's routine. People stopped at the same place without thinking. The vendor knew their face, their usual order, sometimes even their mood. This familiarity created comfort in a city where many relationships were unstable or temporary. Junk food also influenced social hierarchy in quiet ways. While rich and poor ate from the same stalls, the reasons were different. The wealthy chose street food for convenience. The poor depended on it entirely. This difference mattered. Choice protected the rich from long-term damage in ways the poor could not escape. Slaves were especially affected. Many had no control over when or what they ate. Junk food was often their only option, consumed quickly between tasks. Their bodies were pushed hard and fed poorly. The state relied on this imbalance to maintain productivity without concern for longevity. Women, especially working women, also relied heavily on street food. Cooking at home required time, fuel, and space many did not have. Junk food allowed them to survive exhausting schedules, even if it weakened them over time. This reality rarely appears in elite writings, but it shaped everyday life deeply. Children raised on junk food learned to associate eating with urgency. They ate fast, standing, often alone. This affected their relationship with food for life. Meals were not moments of connection or rest. They were interruptions between demands. The constant salt and grease contributed to swelling, thirst, and digestive discomfort. Romans described heaviness in the body as normal. Medical texts mentioned bloating and sluggishness as common conditions. Treatments focused on balance, purging, or bloodletting, rarely addressing diet directly. Junk food also affected emotions. Heavy meals dulled sensation. Wine softened stress. Food became a way to manage feelings as much as hunger. This emotional use of food feels very modern, but it was deeply present in Rome. Festivals intensified everything. During games and public celebrations, junk food became louder, richer, and more excessive. Eating was part of excitement. Discomfort afterward was accepted as the price of enjoyment. This pattern reinforced the idea that food existed for immediate satisfaction, not care. Despite all this, junk food kept Rome functioning. Millions were fed daily. The city did not collapse under hunger. This success made the system untouchable. No one wanted to change something that worked, even if it caused quiet harm. Over generations, this diet shaped what Romans considered normal aging. People expected to slow down early. Pain was expected. Fatigue was expected. Junk food quietly lowered expectations of the human body. As night fell again, the city repeated its ritual. Smoke rose. Pots were stirred. Oil crackled. Bread softened. Sausages sizzled. Hunger was answered quickly and without ceremony. This long-term repetition is what defines Roman junk food most clearly. Not indulgence, not laziness, but a system designed for speed, volume, and survival in a city that demanded constant motion. Rome did not fall because of junk food, but junk food shaped the lives of those who carried Rome on their backs. It fed them just enough to keep going, while slowly asking more than it gave back. And so the streets continued night after night, feeding the empire quietly, efficiently, and without pause, one heavy, salty, familiar meal at a time. By now, Roman junk food had become something people rarely questioned, even when their bodies showed clear signs of strain. Pain, tiredness, and discomfort were no longer treated as warnings. They were treated as background noise. People assumed that feeling worn down was simply the cost of living in a great city. Food was not expected to heal. It was expected to silence hunger long enough to keep going. As people aged, the effects of this diet became clearer. Older Romans often complained of weak joints, constant digestive trouble, and shortness of breath. Many could no longer tolerate the same heavy foods they had eaten all their lives, yet alternatives were scarce. Even when the body asked for lighter nourishment, the streets offered only more of the same. Junk food did not adjust to aging bodies. Bodies were expected to adjust to junk food. This created a quiet divide between those who could retreat and those who could not. Wealthier Romans might slowly withdraw from street food as they aged, relying more on home-cooked meals prepared by servants. The poor had no such escape. Their bodies carried the full weight of years spent eating whatever was cheapest, fastest, and most filling. Junk food also shaped how illness was experienced. When someone fell sick, appetite often vanished, but recovery was difficult because proper food was unavailable. Thin broths and soft foods were recommended by doctors, yet many people could not afford to prepare them at home. Street vendors rarely sold food suitable for recovery. Illness lingered longer than it needed to. The connection between food and disease remained unclear. People blamed bad air, divine punishment, or imbalance of humors. Junk food escaped direct blame because it was too deeply embedded in survival. Questioning it would mean questioning the structure of city life itself. Despite this, small adaptations appeared. Some vendors began offering lighter broths in the morning. Others sold watered-down stews for the sick or elderly. These changes were minor, but they show that Romans recognized the limits of their diet, even if they could not fully escape it. The soundscape of junk food was as constant as its smell. The crackle of oil, the scrape of ladles against clay jars, the clink of coins. These sounds blended into the city's heartbeat. Food was not just eaten. It was heard, smelled, and felt everywhere. Junk food also influenced how Romans experienced time off. Rest days did not bring lighter eating. They brought heavier indulgence, more fried foods, more wine, more sweets. Rest was celebrated by excess rather than recovery. This pattern deepened exhaustion over time. Public baths offered brief relief. People washed away grease and sweat, but they returned immediately to the same food stalls afterward. Clean skin met dirty diet. The contrast did not trouble them. It felt normal. Children watching adults learned that eating poorly was simply part of adulthood. Complaints about stomach pain or fatigue were met with acceptance, not concern. This normalized suffering quietly and early. Even soldiers passing through the city relied on junk food. Accustomed to simple rations, they found Roman street food heavy but satisfying. It filled them quickly before returning to duty. This further reinforced the idea that junk food equaled strength, even when it did not. As Rome expanded, the same food culture spread outward. Smaller cities copied the Thermopolium model. Fried foods, sausages, and garum-heavy meals followed roads and trade routes. Junk food became part of Roman identity across the empire. The longer this system lasted, the less visible its costs became. When everyone eats the same way, decline feels natural. When discomfort is shared, it feels ordinary. Junk food hid its damage behind familiarity. And yet, despite everything, people continued to line up. Hunger still arrived. Relief was still needed. The body demanded fuel, not philosophy. Junk food answered that demand every single day. As another night wrapped the city in dim light, stalls remained open, pots still bubbled, oil still smoked. Romans ate, wiped their hands, and returned to crowded rooms, unaware that this simple act connected them to millions before and after them, doing exactly the same thing. This is the quiet power of Roman junk food. It did not announce itself as harmful or indulgent. It simply existed, feeding an empire steadily, imperfectly, and relentlessly, shaping lives through repetition rather than choice. As this pattern continued uninterrupted, Roman junk food began to shape not only physical health, but emotional endurance. People learned to live inside a constant state of mild discomfort, and over time that discomfort stopped being noticed. Hunger, heaviness, thirst, and fatigue blended into a single background feeling that defined urban life. Junk food did not create extremes. It created sameness, and sameness was easier to survive than constant crisis. Romans came to expect that eating would never truly refresh them. Food was not meant to restore energy completely. It was meant to prevent collapse. This lowered expectation quietly shaped how people judged their own bodies. Feeling good became rare enough to feel suspicious. Feeling okay became the goal. Junk food trained people to accept this reduced standard without protest. The rhythm of digestion itself changed. Heavy meals slowed the body, but because work never slowed, people carried that heaviness with them. Movement became stiff. Breathing became shallow. Yet because everyone felt the same way, it felt normal. Collective experience hid individual warning signs. Street vendors adjusted again and again, refining food to match this reality. Meals became denser, not larger. More fat, more salt, less volume. This allowed people to eat quickly without stopping long enough to rest. Junk food supported motion, not recovery. The city demanded motion above all else. The reuse of ingredients became more aggressive. Oil was reused until it barely flowed. Stews were reduced again and again, thickening until they were almost paste. Bread became filler more than food. Vendors knew exactly how far they could push ingredients before customers complained. This line was tested constantly. Garum remained the great equalizer. Its sharp intensity cut through everything. Old food, bland food, tired food. It reawakened appetite even when the body resisted more intake. Romans trusted garum deeply. Its presence signaled that food would satisfy, even if it harmed later. Because of this, junk food also shaped memory of illness. When people felt weak or sick, they often remembered having eaten poorly, but not differently. The idea that food itself could be the cause remained distant. Illness felt mysterious, unavoidable, or divine. Junk food remained innocent in the public imagination. The streets reinforced this innocence. Food stalls were lively, social, and constant. They felt alive. Kitchens, when they existed, felt dangerous and isolating. Fires killed families. Street food did not. That contrast mattered more than nutrition. Over time, Roman junk food became woven into moral thinking. Enduring discomfort without complaint was seen as strength. Eating heavy food without rest became a sign of toughness. Complaining about food marked someone as weak or spoiled. This cultural framing protected junk food from criticism. Writers who warned against excess were often ignored or mocked. Their advice felt disconnected from reality. Moderation sounded nice, but hunger was louder. Junk food answered hunger immediately. Philosophy did not. The city itself adapted physically to junk food culture. More thermopolia, fewer communal kitchens, more food stalls near workplaces. The built environment reinforced the habit. Rome shaped food, and food shaped Rome. Generations passed inside this system. Children grew into adults who never knew another way. Their bodies adapted early. Their tastes formed around salt and fat. Fresh food felt unfamiliar, even unpleasant. Junk food became comfort food long before the concept existed. As the empire aged, the system did not collapse. It persisted. Even during shortages, junk food adapted. Portions shrank, ingredients changed, but the structure remained. The city always fed itself somehow. This endurance gave junk food a kind of quiet authority. It survived fires, plagues, political chaos, and war. It fed slaves, citizens, soldiers, and travelers alike. It did not discriminate. It simply filled space in the stomach. As another evening settles in, nothing changes. Smoke rises, oil crackles, voices echo, hands exchange coins. Food disappears into mouths. Relief arrives briefly. This continuity is the true story of Roman junk food. Not excess, not carelessness, but a system designed to sustain a massive population at the lowest possible cost, paid slowly and quietly through the bodies of those who depended on it. As this way of eating continued to shape everyday life, Roman junk food began to influence how people understood survival itself. Survival was no longer about thriving or growing strong. It was about maintaining just enough energy to endure tomorrow. Junk food fit perfectly into this mindset. It did not promise health, it promised continuation. And for most Romans, that was enough. People learned to listen to their bodies in very narrow ways. Sharp hunger demanded action. Everything else was ignored. Mild sickness, constant fatigue, slow digestion, aching joints. These sensations became part of the background of living in Rome. Junk food did not eliminate pain. It taught people to live with it. The city's constant noise and movement reinforced this acceptance. There was little space for stillness or reflection. Meals were eaten standing, often while thinking about work, debts, or family. Food did not invite pause. It filled space quickly and allowed life to continue without interruption. Street food vendors became experts in managing this fragile balance. They learned how much grease created satisfaction without causing immediate sickness. They learned how much salt stimulated appetite without provoking complaint. They learned how to stretch ingredients without crossing the line into obvious spoilage. This knowledge was practical, not written, passed through habit and observation. Junk food also became deeply tied to routine. People ate at the same times from the same stalls in the same streets. This repetition created a sense of order in a city that often felt chaotic. Knowing where and how you would eat each day provided stability, even if the food itself was poor. This routine shaped emotional resilience. Familiar food dulled anxiety. Even bad food felt comforting when it was expected. Junk food became part of how Romans managed stress, fear, and uncertainty. It did not solve problems, but it softened their edges. The constant reliance on salt had visible effects. Swelling in hands and feet was common. Thirst followed meals relentlessly. Wine consumption increased to compensate. This cycle deepened dehydration and fatigue, but Romans rarely connected these effects. They treated them as normal consequences of work and age. Over time, the taste for subtle flavors faded. People expected intensity. Bland food felt unfinished. This made it harder for lighter meals to satisfy. Junk food trained the palate to demand more salt, more fat, more sauce. This dependence tightened the system further. Food stalls became emotional landmarks. People associated certain moments of relief with certain places: a stall near a work site, a vendor outside the baths, a counter near the forum. These places anchored memory and routine in a city that changed constantly. Even religious life intersected with junk food. After rituals, sacrifices, or festivals, people ate heavily. Food marked transitions between sacred and ordinary life. Junk food absorbed these moments easily, becoming part of celebration as well as survival. The physical toll continued quietly. Many Romans experienced early aging. Strength declined faster than expected. Medical writers noted that city dwellers aged poorly compared to rural populations. Still, few changes followed. The city demanded efficiency, not longevity. Junk food also shaped expectations of hardship. Enduring discomfort without complaint became a virtue. Complaining about food signaled weakness. This cultural attitude protected the system from challenge. People blamed themselves rather than the food. As Rome grew larger and denser, junk food became even more essential. Feeding millions required speed, volume, and predictability. Fresh, careful cooking could not meet that demand. Junk food filled the gap relentlessly. The empire's stability depended partly on full stomachs, even if those stomachs were never truly healthy. Hunger riots were rare when food was available, even if it was poor. Junk food acted as a pressure valve, releasing unrest through calories. As night falls again, the city settles into its familiar pattern. Smoke drifts upward, oil crackles, garum splashes, bread softens. People arrive hungry and leave full, carrying heaviness back to crowded rooms. This unbroken cycle is what allowed Roman junk food to endure for centuries. It adapted to shortages, absorbed new ingredients, and survived crises. It became invisible through familiarity. And still, day after day, it continued to shape lives quietly. Not through dramatic harm, but through constant compromise. Junk food kept Rome alive while slowly redefining what it meant to feel human inside a city that never truly rested. As the years passed without meaningful change, Roman junk food became deeply tied to how people understood normal life. There was no clear moment when anyone decided this was the way things should be. It simply happened, slowly, as convenience replaced care and repetition replaced choice. Over time, eating quickly and heavily felt as natural as breathing in dusty air or stepping over waste in the streets. People no longer thought of food as something that shaped the body. The body was expected to adapt to whatever food was available. If digestion felt slow, that was life. If sleep felt heavy and restless, that was age. Junk food trained Romans to interpret physical discomfort as normal existence rather than warning. The structure of the city reinforced this belief constantly. Streets were narrow, homes were crowded, fires were feared. Cooking at home felt dangerous, even irresponsible. Eating outside felt safer, even if the food was poor. Safety was valued more than nourishment, and junk food fit that priority perfectly. Work culture depended on this system. Laborers could not afford long breaks. Junk food allowed eating without stopping. A few mouthfuls of bread soaked in wine, a greasy sausage swallowed quickly, a cup of cheap wine, then back to work. The body never fully rested, but it kept moving. This constant movement shaped muscle and posture. People grew strong enough to carry loads, but not flexible or rested. Bodies hardened, then stiffened. Junk food supported this kind of strength, short-term and functional, while quietly undermining recovery. The emotional relationship with food grew more complex. Food became reward, distraction, and relief all at once. After a difficult day, eating something salty or greasy brought immediate comfort. This comfort mattered deeply in lives filled with stress and little control. Junk food became one of the few pleasures that was always accessible. Because of this, criticism of junk food rarely gained traction. To criticize it felt like criticizing survival itself. Philosophers could talk about moderation, but hunger spoke louder. Advice without alternatives meant nothing. The smells of junk food continued to define neighborhoods. People navigated by scent as much as sight. Oil smoke marked busy streets. Garum marked food zones. Sweet honey scents marked festival areas. These smells helped people orient themselves in the chaos of the city. Food stalls also became markers of time. Morning meant lighter food. Midday meant reheated stews. Evening meant fried foods and wine. The body learned this schedule, responding to smell and habit rather than hunger alone. As generations grew up inside this system, expectations narrowed further. Few imagined meals as something slow or restorative. Eating was functional, efficient, necessary. Anything else felt unrealistic. This shaped how Romans thought about care. Caring for the body meant enduring discomfort rather than preventing it. Healing meant surviving illness, not avoiding it. Junk food fit this philosophy perfectly. It did not promise wellness. It promised continuation. Even when shortages struck, junk food adapted. Portions shrank. Ingredients changed. But the structure remained. Frying replaced boiling when water was scarce. More bread filler replaced meat. Garum covered everything. The system bent, but did not break. This adaptability made junk food powerful. It could survive instability better than careful cooking. In times of crisis, speed and density mattered more than quality. Junk food delivered both. As the empire aged, this diet quietly aged with it. Bodies grew tired sooner. Work became harder earlier in life. Pain arrived younger. But because everyone experienced this, it felt natural. No comparison existed. At the end of each day, Romans still returned to the same counters. Coins passed hands, food passed mouths. Relief arrived briefly. Then heaviness followed. This cycle never announced itself as harmful. It simply continued day after day, feeding millions just enough to keep them moving inside a city that demanded endurance more than health. And so Roman junk food remained what it had always been. Not a luxury, not a failure, but a compromise accepted so completely that it disappeared into the background of life itself, shaping bodies, habits, and expectations without ever asking permission. As this system carried on without interruption, Roman junk food began to define not only how people ate, but how they understood care, neglect, and responsibility. Food was no longer connected to the idea of looking after oneself. Survival was separated from well-being. As long as a person could stand, work, and return the next day, the system was considered successful. Junk food supported that narrow definition perfectly. Romans rarely connected their constant fatigue to what they ate. Fatigue was blamed on age, hard work, fate, or the will of the gods. Junk food hit its role by working just well enough. It stopped hunger pains. It gave short bursts of energy. It never offered enough clarity for people to see what was missing. When something fails slowly, it is easy to ignore. The body learned to store energy differently. Heavy evening meals became common because work ended late, and hunger peaked suddenly. Eating large amounts at night calmed the body enough to sleep, even if that sleep was shallow and broken. Over time, this pattern became normal. Waking tired was expected. Feeling stiff was expected. Junk food normalized decline. Street vendors refined their offerings even further. They learned that people preferred food that felt substantial immediately. Crisp fried dough, thick stews, dense sausages. These textures reassured eaters that they had received value. Light food felt like a trick. Heaviness felt honest. This expectation reshaped taste deeply. Romans came to distrust subtlety. Simple grains without oil felt unfinished. Vegetables without sauce felt empty. Junk food trained the mouth to expect intensity. This made it even harder for lighter food to satisfy, tightening the cycle further. Food also became a way to manage mood. Stress, frustration, and anger softened briefly after eating something hot and salty. Wine deepened this effect. Junk food did emotional labor that Roman society otherwise ignored. It comforted people who had little control over their lives. This emotional role made junk food resistant to reform. Removing it would not only cause hunger but emotional instability. The city relied on food to absorb pressure quietly. A fed population complained less, even if it suffered more. Over time, junk food shaped how Romans judged fairness. If everyone ate the same poor food, it felt equal. Shared discomfort became a form of unity. Complaints felt selfish. This mindset protected inequality by disguising it as shared endurance. Junk food also shaped how people understood pleasure. Pleasure became quick, intense, and disposable. Eat, feel relief, move on. There was little room for lingering enjoyment. This mirrored Roman urban life perfectly. Everything moved quickly. Everything demanded attention. Junk food fit the tempo. The long-term effects were visible but unspoken. People aged faster. Many lost strength earlier than expected. Pain arrived young and stayed. Ancient writers noted this decline but framed it as moral weakness or excess, not structural diet. Junk food remained invisible as a cause. Even during times of relative peace and prosperity, the system did not change. Abundance did not bring balance. It brought more of the same, just in greater volume. More stalls, more oil, more salt, more wine. Prosperity intensified junk food rather than replacing it. Travelers passing through Rome adopted the same habits quickly. The city taught newcomers how to eat within days. Standing meals, fast bites, salty flavors. This reinforced the idea that junk food was not local failure, but Roman identity. As centuries passed, this diet became tradition. Children inherited not just recipes but expectations. They learned early that food was something to grab, not prepare. Something to survive on, not savor. This learning shaped generations quietly and permanently. At the end of each day, Romans returned to crowded homes carrying full stomachs and tired bodies. Junk food had done its job. Hunger was gone. Energy remained just enough. Tomorrow felt possible. This quiet success is what made Roman junk food powerful. It did not nourish fully. It did not heal. But it prevented collapse. And in a city as demanding as Rome, That was enough to keep everything moving. So the stalls stayed open, the pots stayed warm, the oil stayed hot, and the city continued to feed itself in the same way, night after night, generation after generation, without ever stopping to ask whether survival alone was all it should expect. By the final stretch of this long story, Roman junk food no longer feels like a choice, a habit, or even a problem. It feels like atmosphere. It is simply there, woven so deeply into daily life that imagining Rome without it becomes almost impossible. Streets without food stalls would feel empty. Even silence would feel strange without the crackle of oil and the murmur of eating crowds. For generations, people were born into this system and died inside it. Their bodies never knew a different rhythm. From childhood to old age, food meant speed, salt, grease, and repetition. Meals did not mark family time or rest. They marked survival between demands. Junk food quietly replaced the idea of nourishment with the idea of endurance. By now, Rome's population no longer expected food to improve life. Food was expected to prevent hunger from becoming dangerous. That was all. The goal was not strength, clarity, or long health. The goal was to make it to tomorrow. Junk food met that goal reliably, even if it asked a hidden price in return. The city itself depended on this trade. Rome could not function if millions needed slow meals, clean kitchens, and careful preparation. The density of people required fast calories delivered anywhere, at any time. Junk food made the impossible possible. It fed an empire without stopping it. Even when Rome changed politically, socially, or economically, this food culture remained stable. Emperors rose and fell. Laws changed. Borders expanded and shrank. But the street stalls stayed. Pots were still reheated. Oil was still reused. Garum still covered everything. The system survived because it adapted to hardship better than comfort ever could. In the end, Roman junk food tells a quiet truth about civilization. Large cities do not survive on ideal systems. They survive on systems that work just well enough, even if they slowly wear people down. Rome accepted this trade willingly, because the alternative was hunger, unrest, and collapse. So when we imagine ancient Rome, we should not picture only banquets, marble tables, and overflowing plates. We should picture people standing in narrow streets, eating quickly from clay bowls, wiping greasy hands on worn clothing, and returning to crowded rooms with heavy stomachs and tired bodies. That was Rome's real daily food, not glorious, not healthy, but constant, reliable, and deeply human. As the oil lamps dim and the last stalls close for the night, the city settles into uneasy sleep. Tomorrow the fires will be lit again. The jars will be filled again. The same food will be eaten again. And Rome will continue, fed not by luxury but by repetition,